It's rapidly approaching 4 in the morning. I have some whiskey. Let's get to the bottom of this stereotyping business. This is a response to Vigadeath's video about the same subject. Where to start? First thing is stereotype. If I'm going to define it, I would say a stereotype is a way for a majority of people to feel that they understand, or at least are able to identify a minority. So, for example, if we take the stereotype of people who are into metal, it's usually men with long hair, beards. They tend to be wearing black. You'll tend to find them wearing band t-shirts, unsurprisingly. You know, these are the things that build the stereotype. These are the components that build that up. And what's curious with stereotypes is it really is only the very surface layer of detail that's creamed off to make them. When Vigadeath commented on the high school shootings and how you get the blame always pointed at violent video games or angry sounding music, the media love that sort of aspect, and it's wheeled out again and again. I mean, the violent video games thing goes way back. It goes back to the dark ages. At least it goes back to the point where the graphics weren't really impressive enough to hold up that argument. But yeah, I digress. The high school shootings. Well, the thing I find peculiar about that is that in the news over here, every so often you'll get some horrible story about, you know, somebody who's killed their family and then killed themselves, and the neighbours are always on the TV being interviewed, and it's like, oh, they were such a normal family, they were so quiet and polite and lovely, and you think, well, that blows the hell out of your stereotype then, doesn't it? Stereotypes are flawed because they're identifiers of something that doesn't exist. If you were around in what I will refer to, because I am stubborn, as the early 2000s, where goth was definitely the in thing, it was the in, I'll call it a fashion, I don't mean any aggravation by that, but it was the in fashion amongst, especially amongst younger people. And you had the kind of the goth stereotype, you know, and it was totally wrong. If you took it and you went to anybody who looked likely and said, here is what the media are saying goth is that correct? Is that what you would consider yourself? You would not find a single person. Most of them didn't even like the word goth or use that because they felt that it wasn't enough. At least these are people from my experience. You know, I don't claim to know for everybody. And again, chavs, if I say chav, you can see in your head instantly you've got the mental picture, unless you're not from the UK, in which case I apologise, you don't want to know. But chavs, you know, I say chav like I might say redneck, for example. You'll know. You'll see it. It's there in your head. But I'm yet to find a single person who would actually call themselves a chav and accept that stereotype as, oh yeah, that's right, you know, that's me. You got me nailed, dead bang, well done. Stereotypes are false. They're not, you know, they may seem to be accurate, but they're not. And the way they're built kind of fits with a pet theory of mine, which is a kind of positive-negative reinforcement thing. If you, say, go out with a friend and you go to have a meal and you order food, and then a week later, say you do the same thing, and the second time you order the same food, that's almost like after 2 times of it in a close enough period, it trips it over into being an always. It's like, you always order that, you always do this. And again, with negative side of it, you know, if you didn't do something twice in a row, say you said you were going to show up and you didn't show up twice, or you were late twice, it becomes you never show up, you're always late. And these are the things that build stereotypes. I suppose from an evolution point of view, it makes perfect sense. You know, you need to be able to build a quick reference guide to your world in your head so that you are able to avoid dangers and recognise behaviour that could have an application to you. But I certainly agree with Vigadeath. Media stereotyping is the worst. It's the absolute worst. It's not just lazy, it's not just lazy journalism, it can be actively harmful. If a stereotype sticks, it's a hell of a job for it to be shifted. Just as a personal example of far-reaching consequences, in 1999 the movie The Matrix was released, and this has been discussed to a degree in the comments, excuse me. However, we're now in year 2011. It's been getting on for 12 years. 12 years since that film. And I need not really point out the many ways in which I don't resemble Keanu Reeves, or in fact anyone from the films. And yet I still get people shout Matrix at me. My advice there, incidentally, is if it's taken you 12 years and you still haven't come up with a good joke, you're best off getting back inside your mother and trying again. But my point with that is, while it's true I'll do wear a long coat, it's a blue woolen coachman's coat and does not really resemble a black leather trench coat in the slightest, in as much as I don't resemble Keanu Reeves, and yet I still get it. I still get it shouted. It's bizarre, but again, it's that shallow creaming off of information. It's like long coat, and that's it. That triggers the attempted insult and inevitable failure. Now, if you apply that to something that actually matters, say people's perception of a certain racial group or a certain sexual orientation or anything that marks people out as different, I mean, that's dangerous. That sort of knee-jerk brain problem that people have is dangerous. I find it very curious indeed, for example, how homosexual and rapist seem to have almost become synonymous at some points in time. You know, it's in the same way that the word paedophile now specifically seems to refer to a male child molester, which isn't entirely the full story of something like that. Stereotyping, it's a bad thing in those respects. When taken lightly, when used in a manner that's just as a kind of rough guide, then it can be handy. You know, it saves a long-winded explanation like I've been giving since the start of this video, and it's a good shorthand. But it's when people don't actually look any deeper, it's when people don't investigate a stereotype and don't try and find out and learn for themselves, that's when it becomes a problem. When people don't want to know, when people don't want to learn, and they're happy with the most basic description, that's when stereotypes are very bad news indeed. Now, to specifically address Vigadeath's question about metal and Transformers, I'll need a drink. It's a funny one, that's to be sure, and I wonder if it's just simply perhaps an age thing. I'm not sure, because, you know, obviously a lot of people who are into both Transformers and metal have been into these things for quite a while, and I know that when I was a kid, being into both of those things was incredibly uncool. It's ironic, really, that, you know, the geek have indeed inherited the earth, that all the hours of pouring my time into an Amiga 1200 have kind of paid off. The point is that being into metal used to be intensely nerdy. It used to be considered very much a socially unacceptable thing, and that you were a real loser if you were part of that crowd. But I think the reason that a lot of people who are into what you might consider typically geeky stuff are also into metal is because these things provided an escape. You know, when I was a kid, you had a choice. It was football or buggered if I know. And if you weren't into football and you weren't into sports and you weren't into all the typical stuff, which in itself, as an aside, is intensely nerdy, if you know anything about league structures and football history and statistics and player names and their skills and transfers and amounts and all of this stuff, that's incredibly geeky. You are a full-on football geek if you know all these things. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, just trying to put it in perspective. Now, to try and pick up that thread where I left it. Right, I was talking about escapism. If you're a nerdy kid, if you were a kid, that is, who wasn't into the socially acceptable, the norm, you know, the things that you were supposed to like according to everyone else, then you probably didn't have many friends, and you probably didn't have an outlet. And for people like that, for people like me, when I was that age, video games and fantasy and sci-fi books, all of these things provided an escape, an outlet, and metal is another of those things. So a lot of these nerdy things tie together for that very reason. As for where Transformers comes into the mix, well, it kind of perfectly encapsulates a bunch of things. You've got the technical sort of engineering side of it, which is very much a kind of geeky thing. At the same time, you've got a certain burst of nostalgia that comes in as well. And then there's the third angle of the trivia, the identifying with the characters who, you know, when you were a kid, if you were a particularly nerdy kid, maybe those characters did actually count as your friends. There are other compelling things to look into that I simply don't have time. Like, why are cats so prevalent on the internet rather than dogs? You know, I'm a cat person, and so apparently is everybody else online. Is it just a sort of techie thing? Is it just that if you're particularly nerdy, cats suit you better than dogs? I don't know, maybe dogs are for the sporty outdoor people. Really no idea on that. And it's funny as well how, as Vigadeath pointed out, some stereotypes are kind of based on truth. Like the stereotype of a scientist, the lab coat, glasses. Why do scientists nearly always have glasses? Is it that having glasses leads you to a life in science? Or is it that a life of study ruins your eyesight? Maybe it's a third thing, and this is the question I'm passing on. Can anybody explain to me the link between scientists and glasses? I'm interested in that one. Anyway, I've talked for long enough, and my drink is getting shallow, so I'd better wrap this up. I shall do so by saying thank you to Vigadeath for asking the question, and I hope that this reply has been of some use to people. I haven't got my hat on, but ta-ta.